And so I now spend the majority of my time outside of the continental US, live down in Puerto Rico. But I've taken my husband to Hawaii. He fell in love with Hana and the island of Maui. And so my hope is I can continue to convince him to make the trip from New York down to the island so we can keep those adventures going.
Fantastic. Now, I will say that my wife and I had started going to Molokai about 6 or 7 years ago. And in the beginning, we were like, oh, this is amazing. Now we're like, hey, Maui is the best. We're trying, and Big Island, like we just love Molokai. You haven't been there. It is, I don't know if I should be saying this publicly. In fact, I'm just going to not say anything. Say Maui no ka oi. I will say this, though. I have gone and made another kind of YouTube blender. We were talking about how I am trying to chew gum and talk and hit all these buttons. So it turns out that I did not hit the button for YouTube. So all the other, like my family and my friends on my personal Facebook page are watching this. Hey, what's up, everybody? Brandy, my daughter, I told her to watch this one in particular because, she's in Texas. She's 31, I think, right now. I'm like, Brandy, you got to watch this interview with my friends from Coursera because it could change your life. But I forgot to push the button for YouTube. So for those of you who are still there, I see you on there. Just say what's up. If you're watching this live, just say hi in the comments. Again, because I will say this one more time, sometimes we're kind of used to this idea of everybody, turning your cameras off, and having the chat disabled. Well, right now the chat is fully enabled, and in fact, I want you to look at this as more of you're part of the conversation. So, guide the questions. Ask me questions on the thing that I'll ask our team here from Coursera, and then we'll be good to go. And so the good news for you, though, Sam, is that the people on YouTube who are going to be watching this did not know that you have not been to Hawaii until I just said it again. So
I knew you were going to try to spare me some of it.
But we've talked a little bit about your Hawaii experience. Sam, let's start with you again, because I threw you under the bus, but just share a little bit about how you got to where you are now at Coursera. A little bit of background, besides the fact that you didn't you've never been to Hawaii.
That's right. Happy to. And so, my route to Coursera and my route to this conversation today is probably a bit non-standard. I was in the military for about 8 years on active duty, serving in the Air Force as an intelligence officer. Despite 8 years active duty in the Air Force, never had a chance to go to the Air Force bases in Hawaii. But so I spent 8 years in the service and ultimately made a choice to separate and move into a different field. And what I really was moved by and wanted to do was find an opportunity where I could work for a company that had a significant global impact, that was serving people at a scale that, was significant and beyond the scope of what I've been looking at in the past. And I found myself at Coursera. And I think what was so unique about joining Coursera was the time that I did. I joined Coursera in February of last year. And I was actually one of the last employees to actually visit our headquarters in California before the pandemic really took hold and the travel order and the travel restrictions started to take place. And so I visited the company headquarters for my first week on the job in the end of February. And the next week, the company stopped traveling. And it was really, my experience at Coursera has been profoundly shaped by the past 18 months, what the world has gone through, what's happening to the economy, and what our company has been really focused on doing and working alongside governments globally to help individuals reskill and build on-ramps and pathways into economic opportunity. And so, a bit of a non-standard path, but one that I'm incredibly grateful for that was able to take.
Yeah. Right when the whole world switches directions in a place that nobody has ever seen. You're like, hey, here's my new job. Here's where we're at.
That's right. That's right.
Well, it's good to have you. And we've been talking for a long time.
That's right.
And by long time, I'm talking about like 2020. And to me, in pandemic years, that is a long time. So, and I appreciate all the help that you provide for me and your patience with the things that you've been assisting us with. So, Alison, let me ask you the same question. I'm just curious. We have both of you from Coursera. I'm just curious about how you got to Coursera. I know you mentioned doing some things in New York, or you're from here or from there. But tell us a little bit about how you got to Coursera.
Well, I'm from Texas originally, and I would love to know where your daughter is based in
Oh yeah.
the great state of Texas.
Okay.
But
Some kind of
from
county I've
Austin
never heard
originally.
of. She's like
Oh,
30
really?
minutes out of Dallas Fort Worth, going
Okay.
northeast. I think that's what I know.
Terrific. My whole extended family is in the Dallas Metroplex, but it's a great place to launch a career from, and also like a very affordable and stylish and cosmopolitan place to live if you're in the Dallas metro area. So my journey to Coursera it's non-standard, like Sam's, but in a different way. So I come from a public policy, public sector, economic and workforce development background. So skills are already the thing that I've spent the past 20 years of my career focused on and talking about. That being said, I know when it's time to take my own medicine. And long about 2019, I decided that I needed to up my game in my quantitative and data analytics skills. So I had my background from graduate school. I'd done a lot of work for public policy analysis, and statistics and probability. But because I didn't have the modern programming skills like R and Python, I was pretty sure that my skills were falling into like latency. They were becoming, rather dated, and I'm not sure I would be able to continue to claim them on my resume, and use them to advance my career. And so that worried me, because the analysis piece of my work is pretty important to me. So I went on Coursera to actually try to upskill myself and find the best data science literacy program and start to step into data science, learn how to program Python, make those skills my own and claim them so that I could, advertise them out to the world and do so credibly. And while I was on the platform and weighing the different specializations and programs, I became sort of overwhelmed because there were so many offerings on our platform that seemed like a great fit, that I decided to take a little breather and step back from it for a second and just distract myself with something else so I could come back to the task with a fresh mind. And I absentmindedly clicked on the careers tab just to see what kind of jobs a place like Coursera would have. I was pretty sure they would basically be looking for full stack developers and very hardcore like tech software, type of roles. And to my surprise, they had a role called skills transformation. And I thought that sounds really compelling and interesting. They weren't hiring in North America, they were hiring in Asia, but I reached through my network and reached out to an alumni from the program that I'd done my schooling in, and she was generous enough to connect me into the team I work with now. So a little bit of a circuitous path,
Yes.
but it's got, I am a customer and user of Coursera, and that has brought me not only skills, it has also brought me really fulfilling and important work to do. So that's my journey.
Look at that. Like, I started using the product, and then I bought the company. That's how that goes. So that's a fantastic story from both of you to help us understand. And I think really what you were describing, Alison, is the path that I wanted for my daughter. Randy, are you watching? She's down or something. She's here visiting, right, from Texas. I should really yell at her to get her, make sure she's on this thing. But I wanted her to look at this and say, hey, you can check this stuff out. You can have this skill, but if you don't have that skill, you can go and learn it right now. And you just kind of demonstrated that with the story of where you're at. I realized that I did another little thing. Besides not starting YouTube, I never really even explained what Coursera is. I'm just like, I've been doing a lot of these like basic computers skill training things, and I'm like, somebody asked me the other day, what's the internet? Because I'm saying, hey, you can connect to the internet. It's one of those skills you need to have. And this guy raised his hand, true story, and said, what's the internet? And I go, oh, well let's talk about it, because it's not easy. Al Gore invented it. I'm just kidding. We all know that. But anybody here, Alison, Sam, who wants to kind of explain what Coursera is?
Yeah, the very quick version. So we're an online learning platform. No, it's no problem. So we're an online learning platform, and our goal is to really connect individuals anywhere in the world to the world's best education. And so Coursera think of it as a platform that hosts content, hosts certification programs. We have more than 4,500 courses that are on our platform. What's a bit unique about Coursera, though, is that all of those courses, all of those programs, they're not produced by Coursera. They're produced by either a leading university or they're produced by a leading company, a place like Google, AWS, Salesforce, etc. And the value here is that when an individual, especially someone who's looking to find an opportunity for a new job, to promote inside of their career, when they come to Coursera to build new skills aligned to some of the demands we're seeing in the future of work, they not only build those skills, they earn a certification from the institution that produced the course. So for example, if you take a course from Google, you build skills that are relevant for you to find a new job or relevant for you in your current career. But you also walk away with a certification from Google that you can put on your resume, that you can put on one of your profiles online to really signal to employers that you have skills that are relevant and things that they're looking for in their hiring.
Yeah, that's a fantastic summary, and I think I've heard that a couple times because I brought you onto calls to explain what Coursera is. I'm saying, hey, Coursera is a fantastic resource. Have you heard about it? And in fact, in 2020, right, we here in Hawaii had a whole bunch of like free Coursera licenses that Coursera had donated to us. Do you guys remember that? Do you remember that kind of stuff?
Yeah, of course. So last year, yeah, it was almost a year ago. I mean,
yeah.
And honestly, this conversation started with one of your former live stream participants, Bert Lum, who we had a conversation with initially with Bert, and we had a colleague that Alison and I worked with that knew Bert. We reached out in March. I was actually looking at the email before we got on this call where he reached out to Bert, and it was like in March of 2020, the pandemic is starting to rage, unemployment is spiking, and we're trying to figure out as a company, how can we respond to support? How can we work with governments to help get our courses and certifications into the hands of people who need them most right now? And so we launched an initiative last year called our Workforce Recovery Initiative, which was exactly what you described, Kala, where it's providing governments free access to the Coursera platform so that they could in turn provide that access to residents of their state, of their city, to upskill, to build new skills, to get back to work. And so we partnered with Hawaii through HTDC, the Technology Development Corporation within DBED, and had a really powerful partnership that lasted for about 6 months during this initiative, where we were able to train or upskill hundreds of individuals during the short time frame of that initiative, and really make sure it was aligned with the resiliency and the recovery priorities that the state has inside of Hawaii.
Yeah, and in fact, I think it wasn't hundreds; it was over 1,000 people. I got the final report from Ellen over at HTDC, and we're just going over, how many people have signed up, and so it was over 1,000 people that had taken advantage of that. And I just mentioned to her that we were going to do this Coursera thing, and she's like, "Oh, great!" And that we're working really hard to try and get some of these licenses that you're talking about out to our workforce again. So trying to figure out how to contract and make that thing happen. And she was just thrilled because she is still hearing from people who were on that in 2020 that you had offered. People are still saying, "Hey, is this going to be possible again? Is there something out there, like some resources?" People are taking advantage of it. So I love what you're doing. Alison, you guys had done that not just for Hawaii. Or was that just for Hawaii? Was it just for us?
It was for Hawaiians, but it was also for the world. And all in 2020, we upskilled over 1 million global learners who earned certificates. I think they spent a combined total of somewhere close to 8 million learning hours on the platform. And they really invested in career pathways that we'd curated for them in earning some of those certificates. And as of today, we checked the numbers this afternoon, there's about 58,000 Hawaiians doing something on Coursera. Not necessarily the workforce recovery program, but the demand is there. Hawaiians are learning online.
Yeah, no. In fact, one of my friends that I talk to almost every day over at DBED has been taking some Coursera, like the whole thing. I've tried. I was never a good student, so, but I've gone through like pieces, and I think that's how people have been using it. Like, I'm looking for stuff that I need, so I may not go to chapter 1 or lesson 1 or 2, but he did the whole thing, some kind of economics. Help me understand and help everybody understand a little bit here about what you're offering, because it is a little confusing. Most people say, "Hey, can't you learn this stuff on YouTube?" And I'll set this up for you. LinkedIn Learning has, and they're on here, like flexing. But Alison, some thoughts on like what Coursera does differently and how you do it. What is the differentiator, the USP or so?
Sure. Within the learning ecosystem, and I'll say you are fortunate to have so many Alisons in your life, both from Microsoft Philanthropies, from the workforce system, and from Coursera. But as a person who similarly learns deeply, but also has to learn things, in that episodic fashion of the difficult customer, or reminding myself how to make a pivot table work in Excel because Coursera uses Google Sheets and I need to just make sure that I know something in the afternoon. Coursera can accommodate both the episodic learning where you search for what you need and then you go in and you do a module or a lesson, but we also have everything that you could need along the journey from I need something in the moment for an hour. I just need to take a little lab, apply my skills, and quickly get this learning under control, all the way to I want to earn an online degree from a renowned university. And it stacks from that initial sort of 90-minute, 2-hour investment to a full course, to a collection of courses that are designed to master a skill and to demonstrate mastery at the level that a post-secondary institution would expect, all the way to actually earning degrees that are equivalent to the degree on campus. They are taught by faculty. You are part of a cohort of learners. And so we're designed by two Stanford professors. So we were designed with a higher education lens and mindset. And over the course of Coursera's founding and the years since, we now serve both the campus space. We also serve workforce development programs, and we serve the Fortune 500. And all of them use Coursera, the same content with different use cases, in order to build up the skills of their workforce or their learner groups.
Yeah, I saw that. Government using it, individuals using it, the big companies. I think, Sam, you mentioned Google, who are using Coursera as almost like the back end, or like a giant LMS or something for their company. And I wrote down this phrase that you said, episodic learning, and I thought that is me my whole life, and I wish I would have known that when I was a kid, so I can tell like my parents or my teachers I am doing episodic learning because I'm an episodic learner, and so I'm out. I'm going to go surfing. I'll be back after I'm done. So
and I think there's a case for both. I've heard some of the micro-learning solutions referred to as bite-sized or snackable learning. Clearly, I enjoy snacks, but I also recognize that a snack is not a meal. And so I think there's a use case for both, and a well-rounded learner is going to employ both. The things that they need in the moment for that, I need to solve this problem now. I can't start at, lesson 1, week 1, and do 4 weeks to solve this problem. And at the same time, I learn how to deal with a difficult customer in the moment. But what I really am trying to get is better communication skills and leadership skills. And those are cultivated over time. So
yes.
Our founders were really fortunate to think of it in that way, about how you create both episodic learning as well as long-term mastery.
Thank you. So after, I'm not going to say how many years of life, but I feel a little validated in my learning style. One thing I was doing was I was looking up project management, right? Because this workforce resilience initiative is this project is so many different things spinning and going on. And I went to Coursera, and there's project management things you can go and learn. I can just learn about it. I can learn the terminology, the vocabulary that I hadn't known, and I can skim stuff. There's also, and I know you guys know the features and benefits better than me, but there's transcripts, so I don't have to watch a video. Yep. I can skim stuff, and which I like to do, so I like it. Go ahead, Alison.
If you're an audiobook person, you can put it, my supervisor at Coursera is a huge audiobook fan, and he loves to listen to audiobooks on 2x or even 3x speed. And that is also something that you can do with Coursera,
yes.
Either on the website or on the mobile app. So it's built to accommodate a bunch of different learner styles, foreign languages, audiences with different developmental needs for their learning. It's meant to be accessible and to really flex to different audiences.
And I feel like I'm doing a full Coursera commercial, which I kind of am, right? Because my daughter is on this thing watching, right? So I got a little comment from her. She's watching it on my Facebook page. And Sam, so I'm going to give you a lot of pressure here, okay?
Perfect. I'm ready.
My daughter's watching. And, she started her own business. She's a fantastic copywriter. She's been doing online marketing. She has a business on Facebook. She had 30,000 people in her Facebook group, amazing engagement. She'll write a post and 100 people will comment in 5 minutes. So I'm like, whoa, so she has skills. And I'm just wondering what you would tell her. Brandy, pay attention. she's down the stairs someplace. But what you would tell her, that to kind of get her to understand what Coursera can offer her right now.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would look to Alison as well, just for additional depth here on kind of skills that matter for the future of work. I mean, I think one thing that immediately comes to mind is first one thing that's called our gateway certifications. Our gateway certifications, they're designed to prepare people for in-demand roles, in-demand jobs. And one of the core ones that we have is made by Facebook, and it's on digital and social media marketing. And so I think that could be a great place to start, right? That is one option produced by a company like Facebook, earning a certification from Facebook, and then building skills around digital and social media marketing specifically to help your daughter with the businesses that she's running that are increasingly relying on digital platforms and digital marketing strategies. The other piece, though, to think about is it's not just building digital skills, it's also rounding that out with transferable human skills or soft skills, whether that's communication, whether that's presentation styles, whether it's effective writing. Thinking about a toolbox of skills that are made up of a combination of things, not just digital, not just human skills, not just business skills, but the combination of all three. Those are going to be the elements that we're really going to see as kind of the longer term foundations of what success will look like in an economy that's increasingly digital, the fourth industrial revolution. Right. Those are going to be the foundations of that. Alison, what am I missing? Anything else that you'd add just from the skill development perspective?
First thing, props to your daughter for monetizing her talents. Let's just applaud and recognize that. And I'd say beyond those, the functional and the technical skills, your daughter is an entrepreneur. And so, if I were to make a content recommendation, +1 to everything Sam just said, but I'd also say we have a full suite of courses from Goldman Sachs's 10,000 Women Small Business Program. Help her scale her business, help her add those technical skills and make them marketable to have currency out in the labor market. But at the same time, Gen X, Gen Y, and Gen Z quite largely will have to carry on side hustles as part of the future of work. Work is becoming very fragmented and piecemeal. And so it's always good, especially, at the age of 31, to have that kind of a side hustle that's already growing and prospering and is at the point of monetization. That's real wealth building. That's not just being, a wage earner working in a job and wondering if your job's going to be automated away. That's that extra measure of comfort. And we've also worked a lot with small business development centers because I come to workforce development from the economic development side of the house. And throughout the pandemic, it was the small businesses that were able to use things on Coursera, gain skills to very quickly digitize their business, either whether that was pivoting the business model or figuring out how to market themselves online or just figuring out how to be a virtual business where they used to be a 100% brick and mortar business. That's also part of the recovery. And that's accessible to everyone, not just those with digital or technical skills or those who are trying to skill into a digital field.
Yeah, thanks for the props, Sora. I appreciate that. Sam, you were going to say something.
Well, I was just going to say that this dovetails back to a question I think that you just asked a few moments ago. And one of the points Alison was making, kind of the differences between, micro learning or episodic learning versus deeper learning and certifications. As I think about kind of the two different ideas here, one is helping someone build skills to find a new job, or in your daughter's case, building skills to run her own business and scale her business. It takes a level of depth, right? It takes a level of mastery in order to get to that point, not only to maybe land that new job or find a new opportunity at work, but also to scale a business and manage a business effectively. It often takes more depth than just a kind of initial look at a topic or a bite-sized learning module, that you need to really have a program and a certification in place that will allow you to build kind of the suite of skills that are necessary to truly be successful, to really find that new opportunity. And so I think there's an important piece there that as we think about, how can online learning help communities and help individuals build new skills in this moment of the future of work, it's not just about online learning for online learning's sake. We can't lose the forest through the trees and miss the impact, right? It's also about building the skills that will actually lead to the impact we're trying to achieve. And that takes a level of depth as well.
Yeah, for sure. I know a lot of little things about stuff, like right on the surface. And I realize that and appreciate the fact that I can go as deep as I want to go on the things that you're working with. Like a guy at DBED, Scott Murakami, was talking about this class that he took on Coursera. And he was saying it was challenging for him. I mean, he's like an economics guy, right? And he loved it. And I'm like, ooh, you do that study on household economics and yada, 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 and I'm going to count on you for that kind of information, but there's some things I do want to go deep on. And, Sam, you mentioned this phrase, I think, and Alison, I want you to talk on this just a little bit. Sam, you had said skills that matter for the future of work. And that's what we kind of started out with on this workforce resiliency initiative here in Hawaii. The whole thing was like, how do we have a resilient workforce? Then it was like, the next question would be, well, what are the jobs of the future? So then we can work backwards from there and say, what are the skills required for those jobs? And then train those skills. But then we're realizing that, nobody really knows the future. You can't Google the future, or you can't Bing the future. I think the Microsoft people say. You can't search engine the future. So, we have to be able to be agile, I think is one of the things you talked about. Be able to pivot and learn what we need to learn. But what are the skills that matter for the future of work? And if for people who are watching this, and I see a whole bunch of people now on YouTube. Fill out the chat thing. Make sure that thing works, by the way. And if you do have any questions, just drop them on here anytime, because this is live. You can change the way the questions are asked or what questions are asked. But don't ignore what I just said, because I want you to talk about the skills that matter for the future of work, Alison. What are those? Open up your crystal ball for us and tell us what those are.
So I'll start by saying, I wish we could Google the future. The work that we do at Coursera with the World Economic Forum, they publish a Future of Jobs report. And in this year's report, which came out right around the beginning of the year, I think 85% of the future jobs that will be created between now and 2030, we don't yet know what they are. They don't yet exist, and we can't envision what they may become. So we have to focus on the nearer term future. And then, just as you said, Ka'ala, we have to develop a layer of resiliency and adaptability so that we can,
What happened? Oh no!
Oh no! It's the
they'll start to happen.
Wait, Alison. Wait, you started with A, and then you froze on me, and I'm like, you said we have to start with this, and I lost you. So back up just a little bit so I can catch up.
Oh dear! I don't know when I froze up because it didn't freeze on my end. However,
go ahead. We need to start with what?
I'll say because we don't know what the future, what the future jobs will look like. We know that they probably won't just show up one day. I think there's a large, broad collective agreement on sort of the digital disruptors that, at least for the next 5 years, are going to be impacting every region, every business of every size, and every industry. And those are broadly software development as the number one biggest disruptor, digital goods and services, which COVID has put on major fast forward. Cloud computing, because this is the business transformation for most large enterprises, and they expect their vendors to follow suit. Data, AI, and machine learning, those data science proficiencies, data has been referred to as the new oil, connectivity is the new electricity. And lastly, cybersecurity, because privacy, trust, and securing all that data will become ever more important as a focal point as more and more petabytes and maybe even exabytes and zettabytes of data are generated. It all needs to be protected. And there is a massive shortage of cybersecurity professionals in the US right now. So that is a topic that we are very finely attuned to at Coursera that we're thinking about quite a bit.
All right. I love talking to people who are using words that I've never heard of before. I got stuck after gigabytes, terabytes, and you're using terms that I'm assuming mean a lot more than those, right? So I love it. I do have any thoughts on this, Sam, before there's a question from YouTube, but any thoughts on the skills that matter for the future of work?
I mean, I think, and I'll keep it brief. I mean, I think Alison nailed it. The only piece I would add, and is there's this durable human skills and business skills kind of foundation that sits beneath that as well. That there's these transferable human skills that, whether it's communication, whether it's design thinking, whether it's problem solving, these elements that form what it takes to be an effective employee or individual inside of an organization, those will continue to be relevant, if not more relevant, as companies go more and more digital. So it's those digital skills with a foundation of durable human skills that, and I would defer to Alison as well. I would love to hear her perspective, but I would say that those are kind of, that combination is a key component here.
I have two metaphors. Okay. A customer today likened it to a tree, the skills tree, of which the roots are those durable human skills that Sam just referenced. The trunk are the structural skills, the business skills, the conversancy or familiarity or comfort in a technology-enabled world. And then you have the leaves, the seasonal skills, which are the tools and the softwares that do come and go pretty frequently. They evolve on an ongoing basis. One of our instructors on Coursera, who is an amazing global thought leader in the future of work, her name is Heather Mcgowan. She teaches in a course called Designing the Future of Work, and she talks a lot about the evolution of the learner from or the ideal digital worker from an I-shaped employee who had deep subject matter expertise to the common T-shaped employee, which you hear a lot about today, which is a person who's got some depth in one area but can play across different disciplines. They're multidisciplinary. And where she argues that we're going is to become the X-shaped employee. So as computers and machine intelligence start to take on more and more of our work tasks, by the way, 2025 is when that's estimated to become a 50-50 split between us and the machines. She argues that we need to be both cross-functional and multidisciplinary, but we also have to be able to co-create and collaborate with machine technology. And so that's transdisciplinary. And that is sort of the guiding principle that I use in my work at Coursera, is how can I use business, tech, and human skills to create those X-shaped employees that are going to help create real value for businesses and are going to transform careers and really shift economic mobility into high gear.
Okay, I'm going to have to watch this replay myself just to keep up with the way things are going around the world and the things that you're sharing with us. So the T, the U, the X-shaped employee, I'm trying to figure out what shape I am. I'm like an I shape. Like, I don't even know. But this is
definitely with regards to marketing, with your marketing background and your strategy and the fact that you're a published author and educator, you've definitely got that depth there. Now it will become, as we get more conversant with this technology, how you and your family branch out from that and use technology to carry your message to a broader audience. I would actually love to hear more about Pono and how this lifelong learning ethos plays into your purpose and the Pono philosophy that you share.
Oh, well, thank you so much for asking me a question. Alan Hayashi is asking a question too there, and then let me come back to the Pono one, because it is something that I was just talking about with somebody else from DVED just recently, Scott, and this idea of learning though is the thing. Like I remember when our kids were young and my wife was still in school. I take that back. She was in school. Some of my kids were not even born. I think our daughter was born. And when the kids started coming up, we were like in Hawaii, right? So we were below the poverty line in like household annual income with the number of kids that we had. And we had to make a decision. We're talking about values and choices. And one of them was, hey, if we don't have enough money and it comes to a choice between food or books, what do we do? So we said books. So we take our kids to all the used bookstores all the time. And we never had to come to that point, where it was actually, hey, do you want to eat or do you want to learn? But it was something that we had talked about, it was explicit in our value selection. And now that's kind of like, I'm realizing as I'm talking to different people about computers and digital literacy, that if you can learn online, you can learn whatever you need to learn. Basically, that could change your life in months, So I'm going to come back to that. There's a couple of questions over here. Alan Hayashi, who was on our board at the WDC, actually asked, and he's very involved with the military, and he asked if Coursera offers any online courses targeted specifically at the military for their career development.
Yeah, so I'm happy to take that. And for sure, especially in Hawaii with the sizable military population that's in the state. So I think there's a few answers to the question. On the workforce development side, we do, when we partner with states, when we partner with cities, or we partner with nonprofits, veterans and service members that are maybe transitioning out of the military, supporting those individuals and helping them either find work as a veteran or make that military transition from active duty service into the civilian world. We've worked with those organizations to help them build pathways and build content curations that will help smooth that transition. In terms of working with military active, I imagine that the question was maybe even geared towards supporting active duty members that are still in the service on their careers. We have active partnerships across the Department of Defense. And so we're doing just this, where we're working with the military to support individuals in building skills that the military needs, no matter what service or branch, and helping them build skills that are relevant for them in their service that can help them continue their career and continue to thrive and succeed in the career that they're in. One of the things that we've seen most relevant, it really goes back to a point Alison made a few moments ago, is the stackable nature of the content. I remember as being a service member, one of the things that I would get told very often, very early, young and early in my career, was you need to go and you need to get another degree. You need to go and find an opportunity to continue your education outside of work and go get a second degree. And it was tough when I was doing this about a decade ago, where it was, where do you go? Where do you look? What's worth my time? One of the things that we're having a lot of conversations in the military about is using Coursera not only as a way to build skills for service members today, but then create pathways into degree programs that are on Coursera. So they're not only building skills to help them do better in their current job, but they're creating an on-ramp into a degree or into another academic opportunity that they can use to promote their career as well.
Yeah, I love the thinking on this. I love the planning on that. And Alan, thank you for that question. And I got another question over here that I want to jump in on real quick, because it's something that I have noticed. Like I mentioned YouTube, right? Like my son, I tell people all the time, he learned how to fix our car's brakes off of YouTube. So he's doing all kinds of carbs. And so when I go downhill, dirt road, 4-wheel drive, and I hit the brakes.
I hope you trust him.
I do. And I'm thanking my son Micah and thanking YouTube.
I learned how to change my car's battery. So it's totally doable. Yep.
That's right. Speaking of episodic learning. But Gavin on YouTube was asking, how does Coursera help resolve the signal to noise ratio problem from algorithms that give search results based on what's popular, i.e. or paid promotion by creators, versus what is actually good? And I think this is interesting for me because I've been on that other side trying to, sell online courses, those kind of things before in the past on customer service, leadership, team building. And so you see all these ads and then they say, here's an online class. And then you click on it, it's like $47 or it's $97 or it's $997. And, you feel like you're being marketed a little bit. I'm not against marketing, as a marketing person. But I just feel like it's like, this is a good question from Gavin, the signal to noise. How does Coursera address that or deal with that? Or are you guys just above that kind of thing?
Well, I'll say,
Alison, this is in your wheelhouse.
Sure. I'll say for starters that because Coursera is a platform and we don't create any of the content, our partners are all created equal. So our university partners and our industry partners, there's no way for them to promote content based on anything other than the relevant learning results of 83 million other learners on the platform. So as far as, the algorithms or the search features of Coursera that guide learners, there's no ads involved. There's nothing that's being quote unquote promoted. What learners are actually seeing is either content keyword relevancy, and more than that, the suggestions that are being made are often aligned to information that the learner has volunteered about themselves or courses that other learners before them have taken and been successful at. And it's following, a path that's amalgamated across, tens of millions of learners who are studying the same topic, or who have taken that pathway before. So in some ways, the more learners who join Coursera, the larger the platform grows, the larger the learning population grows, the more robust those recommendations become. And of course, if you're receiving Coursera through a workforce development program or through your employer or through a social impact initiative, a lot of that is also undergoing a layer of subject matter expert curation from somebody who has knowledge of the industry or who has a background in economic and workforce development, who's looking over it to make sure that germane, relevant, timely, and resonant recommendations are being made. Yeah. The learners also have a feedback mechanism, so they can also identify the skills that they feel they have gained, and that is actually presented separate from what the instructor or the creator of the content says they should get out of it. So it acts as another point of validation, and their net promoter scores and reviews add a third layer that is also in part weighted, and it helps us determine when to deprecate content, when there's a quality issue, whether we need to refresh content. We're constantly scanning that information to make sure that the content stays resonant with our learners.
Yeah, and I know that in the reports that I saw from HTDC here, from Ellen, there's so much data that's talking about who took what, who finished what, who liked what, and then I've seen other reports that you have compiled about the tons of people, the students who are using your platform. And there's things like, did this class help you find a new job? Did this class help you get promoted? There's actual relevant outcomes. And again, I feel like a commercial, but I love that stuff. So I've been sharing all those things in little slides, and that there's tons of data. And I think the data, going back to something you said, Alison, a little bit earlier, the data is kind of like king right now. The more data you have, Google, the richer you are in almost every way. Not just financially, but in helping you make decisions, helping you set course corrections. So you have tons of data, and that's a very, very interesting thing for us. So I got a question on YouTube over here from Scott Murakami, who actually has taken some of your classes, and he's a big fan. He says, has Coursera worked with other states? He's in economic development right here in our state. Has Coursera worked with other states to help residents adapt to online education as an option? That's a fantastic question for me, because we're talking about learning, and it's not the way people have been learning historically. There's been all this talk about people who are kids trying to transition to online learning in school, adults, college, university learning, and some results coming back good and some not so good. What have you done with other states to help those residents to transition to online learning?
So in other states, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Alison.
I was going to say in other states, and we've worked with, I would say, somewhere in the realm of 35 states in the U.S. As part of that workforce recovery initiative that we talked about earlier. A lot of them struggle with this. So they've got individuals who actually may need the stepping stone into a digital literacy course because they actually need that, if we're thinking of a scale of, 1 to 10, they actually need 0 to 1 in order to be able to launch. And so we recognize this. We have content on the platform that also helps individuals who might be more comfortable with traditional or classroom learning modalities to understand how online learning is different and how in some ways it actually serves the learning need better. I sat on a webinar with Thomas P. Miller and Associates a couple months ago where they actually looked at, which elements were better served in the college classroom. And it turns out that things like lectures and the stuff that we used to go to in person are actually pretty well replicated in terms of outcomes when they're done in this online fashion. And for some students, it actually helps them retain. So we've got content on the platform that helps learners adjust and understand how online learning is different and how they learn so they can actually be successful on platform. And then we partner also with nonprofits across the country, including Goodwill and Merit America and others. In some cases with states, these are individuals that are providing additional wraparound services, or in some cases, they're ones who are helping gain that 0 to 1 conversancy so that then their learners can step up into Coursera and start getting those digital skills, badges, and credentials. And Sam, I'm sure you have something to add here because you worked with more states than I have, I think.
No, I think what you said was perfect, Alison. And I think all I was going to say was to Scott's question, when we partnered with states, and the story here really goes back to what our experience was in March of last year as we were all thinking about how do we respond to the pandemic? What can we do in partnerships with states? One of the things, and this goes back to the guiding principle, the North Star for our founders, is put learners first. And so as we thought about this moment, this pandemic, the crisis, unemployment surging, one of the things that was at the forefront of our mind was we need to meet people where they are. We need to make sure that we have on-ramps and pathways into programs for individuals, no matter where they are on that spectrum that Alison was talking about. Whether they need just some basic digital literacy courses to build the foundational skills that they need to be successful in a gateway certification. Maybe they're looking to build skills around interviewing or resume building, whatever the case may be. Let's make sure that we're packaging and curating content. And this goes back to an earlier question, then recommending those specific pieces of content to individuals to make sure that those on-ramps are clear and those on-ramps are present and available so that people can start at whatever level makes the most sense for them, and then can have this sequential kind of stepping stones into maybe more advanced programs that have a broader career outcome. But I think the point is, whenever we partner with states at the statewide level, the goal is not necessarily to be prescriptive. The goal is to offer maximum amounts of flexibility to meet the broad range of individuals that the states are serving, wherever they are at that moment.
Thank you.
And to do it with a human-centered voice. So every state looks a little bit different, but there's a lot of co-creation and design going on there to make sure that it's going to work for the learners in that state, for those industries, for those anchor employers.
That's right.
In some ways, it becomes very customized when you get down to that regional and local level. And we know that that's where economic development happens.
And not to come back to this, Sam, but you might have to come to Hawaii because you've never been here. So how are you going to help? Alison, she's already she's been here. She knows. We can circle back. But, this idea of meeting people where they're at is so fascinating to me. I love the idea of not being prescriptive. One of the things that I get asked a lot, and I'm saying, hey, we're trying to do this workforce resilience initiative. We want to upskill our workforce. We want to provide this training. And really some of the training that started this whole initiative for us was some of this looking at what Coursera is offering and other people like LinkedIn. Remember those guys? We're talking about them. But there's tons of online learning resources. That's why I've been talking to you. And so for us, it was like, let's just get people on there. And then some of the questions that I get or the responses is, well, what is the job you're going to get after? And I go, I don't know. And I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with not knowing that I'm going to train you for this job. Because I feel like that mentality is almost like, hey, I'm going to train you on how to use this machine, and then you're going to be back in a factory. And we just don't live in a factory environment. Going back to what you said, Sam, this is the fourth industrial revolution. It's not a factory anymore. I'm in my room, my son's own bedroom here. Kicked him out. So this is my office now, right? This is the 2021. And just the idea of training somebody for this particular job to me is like 2019. I'd rather have people be trained on how to learn and take advantage of all the courses that Coursera has to offer, all these online offerings that are out there, and then we're good to go. But one of the challenges for us is that we have, and I'm sure we're not alone in this, but we have people who are going to struggle with left click and right click and double click. And I didn't know that was an issue. I don't know how big it was. And so we're finding out a little bit more where Hawaii's at. I did put out a full-on nationwide challenge through North Star last week or the week before, the digital literacy guys. I'm like, hey, bring it, other states. Because I know there's no data out there. But there's people who can't get to the resources that you're offering, because they just, number one, don't have a computer or they don't have access to broadband. Shout out to the EBB people. But also even if they had the computer and online, broadband access, they don't know how to turn it on. So they can't do that. And so I think, part of this basic digital literacy thing that we're working on is to get people skilled enough to get onto platforms like Coursera.
I'll tell you, that's what I love about the workforce resiliency initiative that Hawaii has, and the framework that you all are thinking about as you think about not either or, right? You're not thinking about it in terms of it's either building digital literacy or it's providing career pathways and career relevant certifications. you're thinking about it as an and discussion. It's creating the environment that allows both to occur, and then creating a handhold between those, right? Where you're able to support individuals that may need that more basic digital literacy upskilling, allow them to engage in that and to build those foundational skills, but then have a pathway or an on-ramp into a follow-on program like Coursera to then take those skills that they just honed and earn a certification to unlock an opportunity for a new career. And I think the brilliance of that type of strategy of having kind of both available and present inside of the state is, this goes back to the point you just made, is it's not the same world that it was a few years ago. I mean, when you look at the scale of the challenge that not only Hawaii, but the country is facing, we need to be thinking about solutions that can serve at a scale that responds to the challenge. We can't be thinking about serving, it's important. Every individual person that's upskilled is critical. But if we want to move the needle on this challenge, that in Hawaii specifically, how do we diversify the economy? To move the needle on that challenge, you have to be thinking at a scale that uses solutions that are different and uses models that are different in order to accomplish it.
Yeah. Alison, you were going to say something.
Oh, I was just going to say you're right on with the, lifelong learning. This isn't something we're going to do once and then we're going to acquire digital literacy and we're going to know how to use data and then we'll be in a good place for a while. This is going to become, a flow of learning that happens gradually over time. That's a real cultural change. We are, as by and large, a culture that, advocates for about 16-ish years of learning, and then you stop. And then you're done and you throw your mortarboard in the air and then you're going to, have a successful career because you've invested in yourself during those K through 12 and college years, if you're lucky to be able to access all of that education. And now we're realizing that even for the most highly educated, the ones who've gone to their terminal degree, every person at every level will have to adopt this posture of lifelong learning. And so, if that is something that Sam and I can have an impact on in the world, that's what we're here to do. And we want to do so in partnership with both Hawaii, but with states and governments all over the world.
Yeah, and I appreciate the values that you bring, the mission orientation that you're on. I do have a question or a point that I wanted to bring up with you both. And it was talking about that double disruption that is the workforce, like the changes going on there and the pandemic. And people sometimes thinking, hey, we're almost done. We got a vaccine going on.
That's right.
We don't have to wear a mask. And let's go back to what it was before. Thoughts, Alison, on that?
It's interesting that you bring that up. And in New York City, where I live right now, this past weekend was the first time that I was outside and actually saw more than half of people not wearing a mask outdoors, even though the mask restrictions have been relaxed for a little while now. So there is this feeling of exuberance as the economy is opening, but the labor market and the economy are two different things. And so in terms of that double disruption, you had not only a massive global economic crisis, which eroded 8% of the world's work. So, upwards of 230 million full-time equivalents, people fell out of the labor market. People were dislocated from their jobs. People who worked hourly or shift positions saw those shifts either dramatically downsized or eroded. And so, a significant amount of the world's work was lost. And beyond that, 80% of all working people were affected by the shutdown, whether that was because their office shut down or because they did suffer an impact to their working lives. And we're not out of the woods yet. So the International Labor Organization is actually predicting that in 2021, it's going to take a while for the train, to reverse course here, even as the economy opens, even as people get vaccinated. In the best case scenario, they say they expect another 90 million full-time equivalents to be lost over the course of 2021, and more conservatively, upwards of 130 million. And as we know about COVID, the effects are not borne equitably. They're not borne equitably geographically, they're not borne equitably by industry, and they're not borne equitably by socio-demographic group. And so at this point, I think, we've all received the memo and people are pressing down on the gas pedal to make this change happen. I think, either staying the course or perhaps even leaning in is in order in 2021 to make sure that we take the lessons that were learned in 2020 and we actually use them to set ourselves on a new course and a new trajectory. But that combination of jobs, work lost plus digital acceleration has been a pretty serious wake-up call for us on a global level. I'm personally a little bit grateful to see the emphasis on workforce that workforce advocates have been screaming about for decades, and is now, something that we're all working together in cross-sector partnership to affect.
Yeah, and I saw some of the things that you were commenting on in Twitter, because I was looking you up too, and thinking of some of your things. And I hear what you're saying on it. And I think one of the things that is a little bit frustrating for me right now, and I don't know if it's just because I'm in my own little bias, but there's such an emphasis on, and no offense, Bert, don't get mad, but there's such an emphasis on the physical infrastructure that there's very, very little time or attention or bandwidth given to this idea of not just an online, a physical broadband infrastructure, but a learning infrastructure. You just don't hear it, and I'm at people's houses trying to plug in a computer and show them how to use this. And I can't just say, hey, click on this link and take this assessment, because those two things will take 30 minutes to explain. And I think it's a little premature for people to say, hey, we'll just get broadband access. We'll plug everybody in, make sure they have a computer, and then we're good to go. So I'm on my thing right now where I just don't think, maybe this is like whoever's listening, hey, let's make a little shout out. We need to make sure everybody gets the digital skills too to be able to access these things. Sam, any thoughts? Sam, any thoughts on that same thing, that double whammy, the changes going on? What's in your head right now?
I mean, I think the thing that comes to mind most for me is what you mentioned, Kala, which is unfortunately, I appreciate the optimism from workforce leaders that I'm talking to around the country, but it makes me a bit nervous when I hear discussions around the fact that we're going back to normal, right? That the pandemic and the economic crisis were just a momentary crisis, and things will then return back to normal once the health challenges subside. And I think the data that Alison points out is that this combination of the pandemic, which was really the shock to the system, coupled with the automation and technology trends that have only been accelerated, that points us in a direction that tells us this is a long-term challenge that we're going to need to face. And Alison touched on this, but I think the only piece that I would add that is just really important to emphasize is equity is at the heart and soul of this, where if you look at the recovery that's actually happening in the country, it's not equitable recovery. Those that are returning to work are those that were earning the most pre-pandemic. Yeah. Those that remain out of work are overwhelmingly those that were most vulnerable pre-pandemic anyway. And so the gap is widening. And so as we think about recovery strategies, as we think about upskilling, it's not just upskilling at scale, it's how do we upskill equitably and make sure those that are hardest to serve and hardest to reach and need this type of support the most, they have opportunities and on-ramps into economic opportunities that they may not have had before. And so as we're thinking about, how can Coursera play a role? How can Coursera build partnerships that are meaningful in this way? Equity is really at the foundation, is at the center for us, where we think of it's not only helping people build skills for in-demand jobs, it's making sure those that need it most have the opportunity to access it.
Yeah, and you have mentioned before too, when we're talking about getting contracts with you and licenses, that you have like a social impact type of thing that we're counting on accessing. Like at the WDC, we're working with the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, right? And so we owe people who have barriers to access into the workforce, and a whole bunch of the social impact licenses that we're talking about trying to get from you are going to go to them. All of them, right? People, previously incarcerated, you're going to have a hard time getting a job. You're a teenage parent, those are tough situations. And what I've found, and just in the things that I've been reading and talking to people, is that the digital just get more digital. Like in the last 12 months, I bought a new M1 Mac because I wanted to get the new, processor. And so I have 3 monitors, and sometimes I feel a little, hey, oh, sorry, when I come and bring this computer to somebody's house, have you ever had a computer? And they're like, this is my first one. Never had a computer before. But the people who are digital just get more digital, and people who are not, they just get left further behind. And so there really is a digital divide. I never thought of this as like a social issue before, but now I'm seeing it more and more, and I appreciate your focus on that and reminding me of that. I got a couple questions and point, and Scott had a follow-up question talking about suggestions maybe about this lifelong learning, and he says, what kind of suggestions could you give to us to help us explain to people to understand that lifelong learning impacts every job in every industry, and especially in this fourth industrial revolution, which honestly, until the last year, I barely remember the first industrial revolution. Remember that episodic education kind of person? I was out surfing during that class. So the fact that we're in industrial revolution number 4, I'm like, what? How do we encourage people? How do we communicate that to help people understand that lifelong learning is going to impact every job? In fact, that could be one of those big core skills and the roots that you talked about. Anything, Alison, on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think our work with the World Economic Forum, when we look at what the top 10 in-demand skills are for the next 5 years, only 2 of them really center on hard technical skills. So many more of them revolve around those durable skills that Sam was talking about, what Heather Mcgowan calls metacognition. So learning how to learn, not just thinking critically, but knowing how you think and how to apply your thinking skills to problems. 8 of those 10 skills are actually more around how we work, how we communicate, how we learn, and how we navigate through ambiguous or uncertain circumstances. And those are skills that are required over the course of a lifetime. It's one thing to take a course about them. It's another thing to apply them on the job. It's another thing to take the lessons learned and use those as a springboard for your next round of learning. But ultimately, the fourth industrial revolution is about, flows of data and flows of knowledge. And so, if we think about how far we've come from, electrification in the steam engine to today, every one of those disruptions created a friction that took time to even out across the labor market. This will be the same, except that they will come faster and they will be more volatile as time goes on. So think of learning and lifelong learning, if I were to explain it to someone else, think of it as an insurance policy that you will always be able to ride the wave, since you enjoy the surfing. This is a surfing metaphor for you. This is going to be, we understand the currents and the flows, but we don't always know how they're going to manifest when the wave breaks. But if you're doing the lifelong learning and you're embedding in yourself both the grace to just accept what is and then to navigate the wave and the motion of the ocean, then I think you are setting the table for lifelong career success, or at least the resiliency and the self-sufficiency to know that you can handle the shocks and disruptions that will absolutely happen at some point in the future.
Yeah, and you're going to get knocked down. You're going to wipe out, to continue in your surfing metaphor. And the question is, can you get back on the board? And that's what we're trying to define resiliency as. We're also saying that we can't predict what the wave is going to look like. So this is way different, right? Surfing, similar to skiing, where the snow is I'm trying to use your kind of, continent metaphors too, but the snow is different, minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day. But every wave is different, and even if you're at a spot like Pipeline, which I hardly catch any waves because I don't know that lineup, that is kind of predictable. Every wave is completely different, and you never really know what you're taking off on. But if you have that core set of skills, it allows you to adapt and adjust to what the wave gives you. So I love where you're going with that. Gavin was responding to this too, talking about trying to share with people the reality of things that have already changed. This is not something new. It's not because of the pandemic. I saw that AT&T was spending like $1 billion on upskilling their employees. This was 2016, 2017. They started that whole initiative. And that's 200,000 employees. I can't do that kind of math. It's like $4,000 or $5,000 per employee. And I'm trying to think, I just put in a proposal to try and upskill, provide basic computer training and skills for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. And it's going to come out to maybe $400 a person. And I'm saying, who should bear the brunt of that? And this is, can government help? This is where, I'm kind of a small government person, but this is where government can really help. And so $400 to upskill.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring this up because you mentioned economic development a moment ago and how there's been a real legacy focus on physical capital investments. Um, in large part, as a certified economic developer, I can attest to the fact that we use the tools that are in our toolbox, and for a very long time, the majority of those tools were oriented towards physical growth, real estate redevelopment, attracting businesses into the community, and preparing our infrastructure to receive them so that they would have a frictionless experience relocating their operations or expanding their operations in our backyard. And in doing so, they hire people, they skill them up, they pay them, livable and sustainable wages, and then that goes back into the tax base. And so it becomes a flywheel that's self-reinforcing. Site selection consultants are the people who work with those big companies to determine where's the best, most advantageous place to locate. And for the past 10 years, they've been saying that the critical deciding factors are the quality of the workforce and the quality of the workforce programs that train the workforce, as well as the larger education system. And with that knowledge, I think, I have seen over my career in economic and workforce development, I've sort of moved more into the workforce space. That's where I've found my opportunities. But I've also seen some really innovative and progressive partnerships from the workforce and educator side of the house and the economic development side of the house. They're starting to figure out how to thread resources and invest in communities in more of a sort of lifelong career life cycle kind of a perspective. I think that's a really powerful measure. And at least where I started my career was San Antonio, Texas, and they just agreed to tax themselves in the sales tax so that they could invest continuously in their workforce development system. WIOA is up for reauthorization this year. So everyone who feels strongly about workforce skills, sign on as an advocate, contact your representatives and let them know how important this is for you and the people that you serve.
I was just about to say amen. So I hope that's preach, Alison. But
I was an advocate in a previous career, so
yeah,
I was a
please.
lobbyist and an advocate, and I feel really strongly about it.
Advocate away, and again, I started out looking at this as kind of a technical, workforce development, which I've been doing training for years. Like individual management, leadership, those kind of things, teams. But now I'm recognizing some of the social implications of what we're talking about. And it's people don't know, like Gavin is saying, people have to know this help people to understand this, but it's not on the radar for most people. Most people are not thinking about this and not using terms like fourth industrial revolution, durable skills, and they're just kind of going day to day on this. And so what you're talking about is pretty motivating for me here. What we're talking, the topics that we're covering. I'm loving it.
Absolutely. I still want you to link this back to Pono, though. I want to hear your Pono story.
Okay, this is interesting. And let me go back to the surfing thing, because I think, Sam, you haven't been to Hawaii, so you can't really. I'm just kidding. I'm just joking. I'm just joking on that. So, when we talk about Pono in Hawaii, Pono is this idea of, sometimes, people define it as righteousness because it's in our state motto, right? The life of the land is perpetuated, ika pono, in Pono. And that's, Kaukia Oli King Kamehameha III said that is like our state motto. And it is fabulous. I think it's something that I think even applies to what we're talking about here, which is the life of the land is the people, our island is perpetuated. There's only going to have life. It's only going to continue if we are Pono, if we're righteous, we're correct, we're aligned with the right way to live, the right things to do. And when we start talking about perpetuating life, that's a big deal. And I think this is where I'm heading personally in this project. And it's been an interesting, 12 months navigating this for me, because again, it started out pretty technical. It's just here's a project, let's figure out how to make this happen. And now it's becoming something kind of social. So how do we perpetuate, the life in the Aina that, is Hawaii? And I think what we're talking about here is part of that. And it's a big part of what I'm looking at. You mentioned economic development, our state department, economic business development, economic tourism, DBED, and labor, we've been collaborating on like remote work, initiatives over the last like year or so. And it's something really fascinating for us. Like, how does Hawaii get involved in the remote work area at scale? You know, like when people don't know about it or they don't have the skills for it. And so it's pretty interesting for us. Do you guys have time just a little bit to talk a little bit about remote work? Any thoughts on that?
So aside from Sam having worked remotely for his entire career at Coursera,
I've seen his background before he put up Coursera. I know it's his house. You know?
Absolutely. I think it's really interesting. Our CEO, Jeff Maggioncalda, who feels really powerfully passionate about workforce development, was also a very self-described himself as I was an on-site manager. He wanted, prior to COVID, his expectation was that Courserians would be in the office about 4 days a week. And we did have, no meeting Wednesdays or low meeting Wednesdays. But ultimately, we were on site most of the time working side by side. I work on a global team. So no matter what, even before COVID, I am not located within thousands of miles of anybody that I work with. And so I was on Zoom to begin with, and it wasn't a big transition for me. But what really struck me about Coursera was that in the course of the shutdown, the entire team went remote pretty weightlessly and almost overnight. And through the pandemic, our CEO has had a real change of heart because we have doubled in size as a company, and he has seen that remote onboarding, remote collaboration, and even so much as a company going public through an IPO process, all of those things can be done remotely. And so I think that's a powerful testament to the efficacy of remote work. And it has, triggered a cultural shift that probably would have taken a decade or more, if not longer, in order to manifest. But in doing so, for economic development purposes, this, really pulls out all the stops. So no longer do we necessarily have to focus strictly on business attraction and expansion and retention. Mm-hmm. Now it's really shifting even more into the talent attraction, retention, and expansion, and how you use that skilled workforce to attract jobs, even if there's not going to be a headquarters or a plant physically there. And I think for island communities, and I can speak certainly for Puerto Rico has a really large economic development footprint for bio and life sciences. The majority of our nation's drugs are manufactured there, and advanced manufacturing is a heavy emphasis. But they also have a very highly skilled and bilingual workforce. And similar to Hawaii, there's a lot of goodness there that I think is now going to experience a renewed sense of interest or attraction from the mainland and from abroad globally, as people start to look at where the skilled talent resides and how to connect it meaningfully with jobs. And Coursera as a company is now liberated from having to just recruit within the Mountain View, Silicon Valley, San Francisco Bay Area, and New York metro areas. And so that's been a real benefit to us in terms of being able to secure the best talent for our open roles.
Yeah, and wasn't your CEO here in Hawaii for a little bit?
He's a big fan of the islands, and he and his, I believe he has 3 daughters. He may have 4 daughters. He and his family were in Hanalei for an extended period of time during the lockdown, isolating, but also working remotely. And so, if a Silicon Valley CEO can do an interview with Squawk Box, in the middle of the night from Hanalei, Hawaii, on the island of Kauai, then that tells me that pretty much anyone can do what's needed to run their business or to work in a high performance field.
Right. Yeah. Right. So we're trying to get competitive here, right? We want to position Hawaii as one of those states, like when you're talking other people's live streams, I'm not going to be offended, but when you're talking there, we want you to be able to say, hey, we're working with Hawaii, Hawaii is nuts, Hawaii is amazing, their workforce is so highly skilled, how will we know here in Hawaii when we're there, and maybe what do you think the steps are for us to be able to get to that point where Hawaii is recognized, as hey, that's the place where they have that kind of super high skilled, super smart people, problem solvers. They can learn whatever they need to learn. How do we get there?
I think initiatives like the Movas and Shakos is, a major start. I would guess, even though I don't have data on it, I would guess that your program's already oversubscribed. Yes. Tulsa Remote is oversubscribed, so I have to think that Movas and Shakos is even more so. And I think that's one measure of interest in remote work in Hawaii. And then as you start to get people relocating to the island and working remotely without being part of a program or participating in some kind of incentive, that alone you'll start to see some movement. And then taking a look at things like tax filings, et cetera, I think will be another measure in data. But I think to get the brand out there, Hawaii doesn't need a lot of branding help as a place to live. But I think, basically making sure that people know. I think one of the sort of subtext stories about Hawaii that's been, circulating around in the media is that it's an expensive place to live. Mm-hmm. So I think investments in high-speed connectivity and the ability to have a job that's going to, offset the cost of living on the island. Island living is expensive no matter where you are. Mm-hmm. I think, that's going to go a long way. It's going to attract workers, and it's also going to create opportunities for workers on island. For every knowledge worker, I think Richard Florida has in his book about the new urban crisis, for every knowledge worker that locates, another 13 workers have jobs in all of the goods and services that serve their needs for living. So it's going to be a rising tide that floats all boats. And it's really about getting that first critical mass in investing in people on island, and also just making sure that everyone knows Hawaii is open for business and you're very welcome to come.
Yeah, and that's always an interesting thing. The vaccine, the pandemic, the virus itself, everybody's a little leery about it, opening up the doors, and I think this vaccine is going to be kind of interesting. I think one of the challenges for us is to have that door open. And, initially when that whole movers and shakers thing happened, people were like, whoa, you're going to come and steal jobs. I'm like, no. They're going to be coming and working their jobs that are not even here. They're someplace else. And I think one of the things that I'm kind of struggling with, how do we communicate, is to open up people's awareness to the possibilities of remote work, for our current residents here. Like some of them, this is just 9 to 5. This is work as usual. I can't work now because of the shutdown, but when the shutdown's over, I'll go back to work. And I think there's people who don't know that it's not just remote work. Like you get to work, you're working at this office, now you're working at home, but you can go work for Coursera if you're like Sam. You can work out of your house. You can work wherever you are. In Hawaii, you can still live here. I think that's the dream, right? I'm not, even though we're focused strongly right now on upskilling these basic computer skills, really the dream is, that we're trying to communicate is you get to live in Hawaii. You get to stay in Hawaii because so many people are leaving. It's so expensive, it's expensive if you're working that kind of job that you've been working, back in 2019, way back in the day. And so I think the challenge for us is trying to look at our resident workforce, upskilling them, bringing people in who have this kind of mindset, which has always been a Hawaiian thing. And let me go back to your question, Alison, and that idea being pono. The Hawaiian perspective has always been, looking back historically, so this is just all the thinking, okay? So I don't want people to get mad at me. But we've, as a people, as a place, have always looked around and said, oh, this is good. Let's bring this in. Oh, that's good. Let's bring that. And it's become a part of our culture. I remember thinking that, like, there's this throw net. Like my uncle used to teach me how to throw a net, and this little circle of net. I don't know if you guys ever done this, but you throw this net out, and I go, wow, so Hawaiian. But I saw it in this old Chinese movie and realized that we probably, back in the 1800s, I think the Chinese came in 1850, they probably brought some of that culture, and it became part of our Hawaiian place, and so I think this idea of getting people who think along this fourth industrial revolution, kind of mindset, have that mindset, we can say, oh, that's a good way to think, let's bring that in and adopt that as a Hawaiian way of doing our plate lunches, right? Our food, our luau. We have lomi salmon. There's no salmon.
I'm going to put in a plug for Simon because I'm a huge noodle person.
Man, you think Simon when you go to Hawaii, and we do have, I've eaten tons of Simon. All of our food here, you go get a plate lunch, and there's terry beef, lomi salmon. You have this poi on the side, you have the sweet potato, and it's like it's just this mixture, this mixed plate, where Hawaii would take the best and we bring it, and it becomes Hawaiian. It becomes the Hawaii way of doing things. And, we've gone so far over any time. I hope I haven't taken all the time that you have. You're like, Kyle, we got to go. We're live. But I'm going to stop
You've
here.
got me thinking about poke now.
Thank you very much.
You're going to have to go to food. You're going to have to go to Foodland and get some poke. But that is a uniquely Hawaiian export that has now come to the mainland and created its own phenomenon. So to close that flywheel, you've got folks skilling in the fourth industrial revolution. Part of that's about creative work.
Yes.
And you're creating products, creating ideas, creating services that you're then exporting to the rest of the world that are uniquely Hawaiian.
Yes. Very. Like when you start using Hawaiian words that you've seen in the stores in New York, you're like, what? Where are we? That's pretty legit place. But you both have totally blown my mind and expanded the way that I think. I'm looking at a comment here from Stephanie on Facebook. Ohigashi, she says, "This is awesome. I have to rewatch it too." So I'm going to go back and watch like an hour and a half of our conversation. Thank you so much. I've already asked you before we started if we can come back on and do another one of these, maybe in a month or so. Would that be cool? Maybe a month and a half. I know we're trying to get some contract things going, and that might be a nice way to announce that once we get that thing up and running. Would that be okay?
We're happy to. Anytime. We're happy to join you, Kyle. We appreciate the opportunity to join in.
Perfect. And Alison, you be on there too? Is that going to be...
Please, but when Sam finally makes it to Oahu, we have to take him up to Kahuku for some shrimp.
Oh, thank you for bringing that back.
And just turn it into a whole thing. Oh,
That's
yeah.
right.
Thank you for bringing that back.
We've come full circle. It's perfect.
Thank you for reminding me again that Sam has never been to Hawaii. So how can you got to understand, all these things are just going over your head, Sam. So
it's true.
Maybe we plan the next one. We plan the next one live here down in my backyard, and we'll be good to go. Well, before we end, I just want to thank all of you who have stuck with us on this. There's Winona, thanks for watching. She says, mahalo for the informative, thought-provoking session to continue to relate to our program participants. So mahalo to you, Sam. Mahalo to you, Alison. Thank you, all of you who are watching this live. If you're watching this, it's a replay on any one of these gazillion platforms. Drop us some questions because we'll see them and we'll still be able to respond to them. But we want you to leave with Alison's surfing metaphor, right? Every wave is different. And, we're in this fourth industrial revolution, but who knows what that looks like. And so the idea here is that we can prepare. We're strong paddlers. We have the good equipment. We have the good boards. We have the thrusters, the thruster. We have the equipment that's necessary for whatever wave comes up because we're able to learn. And so that takes us back to something that Hawaii was very, very, very strong with back in the day, 1800s, where Hawaii had one of the highest literacy rates of any nation in the world and would love to learn. And I think if we could just get to that point, we'll be ready for whatever wave, whatever hits, we'll be able to adapt. So thank you all very much for being a part of this. Ahuiho, malama pono. We're out.
Mahalo.
Yup. All right. I'm going to stop streaming this.